Good morning. Welcome back to the second day of our symposium. I'm not going to waste time on introductions, except I'm just going to have George come up. George Demiris is the co-PI of Penn AI Tech.
Good morning, everybody. As Rose mentioned, I'm George Demiris from the University of Pennsylvania, and it's a great honor to introduce our two speakers who are going to have a great discussion that I'm looking forward to. My colleague, Dr. Jason Karlawish, who is co-PI of Penn AI Tech and also co-director of our Penn Memory Center, and Dr. Glenn Cohen, who is Deputy Dean at Harvard Law. And after the conversation, we will have a chance for Q&A. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers.
So it just occurred to me, if this isn't an example of the Microsoft Apple ads, I don't know what is. So look at this, is pathetic. Look at this, I got this PC and a tie, and you've got your little iPad and no tie and shoes that could light your way.
Anytime I can beat you in fashion is a good day for me. There we go.
All right, well, I'm gonna win on ideas.
All substance, all style. That's the way it is, just like the PC and the Mac.
Youth before beauty. Bottle of vodka open here. Well, greetings. Hi, Glenn. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So this is what happens when you put a lawyer and a doctor together.
Normally a lawsuit, but there we go.
Exactly. Well, greetings. So, just a bit more introduction. So I'll introduce myself a little bit more and then turn it over to Glenn, and I thought we'd give you a roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm a phissician. I diagnose and treat patients at the Penn Memory Center 1 day a week, typically Fridays, but not today, for obvious reasons. I've been doing that since the last century. And I would say that I'm therefore witness to and participant in the spectacular transformation that's occurred in my field in the last several years. I realize biomarkers and drugs stand at the forefront, but I will say I think even as exciting is the transformations in the use of a variety of sort of interconnected, agentive, unobtrusive technologies, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Glenn, want to embellish your bio?
I'm Glenn Cohen. I'm a professor and the deputy dean at Harvard Law School and run our Health Law Bioethics Center. I do a lot of work on AI and medicine, legal and ethical issues, and I do some advising for life sciences companies in the space as well, and I'm excited to be here.
Brilliant. So, the vision as laid out by the National Alzheimer's Plan is that we will someday develop the ability to detect and prevent/reduce the risk of developing the variety of diseases that cause dementia. So it's a vision of a diagnosis before dementia, before disabling cognitive impairments. And so I thought what we would do is kind of future think ourselves into that vision space where before disabling cognitive impairments, or in a word, dementia, people are being detected and intervened on. So what I'm thinking about, for example, is efforts to use technologies, methods to detect either the presence of what might be called the mild cognitive impairment stage or even the emergence of that stage. And that is a stage I would describe as there's cognitive problems that are causing inefficiencies in daily life. It takes a person longer to get things done. They make some mistakes, but they catch them. And often, but not always, it's an overture to the onset of ultimately disabling impairments caused by that describe dementia, caused by a variety of different diseases of the brain. Alzheimer's is, of course, the marquee one, but there are several others that work as well, in addition to probably a few we haven't totally probably figured out yet. So I thought we'd start with that, and then we'll pivot to the world of dementia, because I think persons with dementia are like the poor. They'll always be with us as much as we would like to make every effort to eliminate poverty as well as dementia. So let's start. So what we're talking about, I thought we'd chat about, is the opportunities, and therefore with each opportunity, the sort of Janus-faced challenges of an interconnected, unobtrusive world of devices that are gathering data about everyday behaviors. They're feeding that data into pre-trained, generalized pre-trained transformers, otherwise known as AI, to integrate this vast data to detect changes in cognition and act agentively to send out alerts, suggest things, do things, etc. So it's a vision. Let me just flesh it out a bit more and then give my voice a rest. Imagine, I think mine's over here, over my heart, or where is it? Oh, good, it's right here. Your smartphone that is detecting the ways you use it, or even some apps that actually ask you to gamify, test your cognition. Imagine your refrigerator, your stove, a variety of appliances are detecting the way you use them. Your car, let's focus on that one appliance. And they're taking this data and they're deciding whether or not you are beginning to develop cognitive impairment or not. It's a promising agentive system built on the Internet of Things, and I guess the question I'm going to put to you, thinking from as an attorney and someone who works in the space of ethics, are we ready for this interconnected, digitally unobtrusive world I've mapped out? Are we ready?
Absolutely not. That's
All
the
right.
short answer.
All right. Well, let's go get your coffee.
There we go. No, exactly. But I want to just pick up on a couple of things you said to start with. Right? So one is like literally the first words out of your mouth were almost was detected and intervened on, which I thought was interesting because passive voice. So one big question here is whether we are going to be passive voiced into the system versus autonomously making choices. And one of the big differences with ambient kind of detection, ambient intelligence, and the idea of free floating around us all the time is the amount of passivity. Right now we have a moment that we're quite aware of when we engage with one of these systems, a large language model in particular. But slowly it's becoming built into everything in such a way that it's not like I'm going to turn it on now. It's that actually I'm going to be a data subject 24/7.
It's like the air we breathe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are some pluses and minuses to that, but just to say that I do think that there is a inevitability towards the march towards that even I think the most well-meaning lawyers and ethicists and pushback on this, I'm not at all confident we could stop it even if we wanted to. Secondly, I want to just pull out this idea of ambience in two directions. One is the ambience in terms of detection. So the idea that we're constantly leaking things that are data that we don't necessarily think of as data about our health, right? So we had a world where when you're trying to make inferences about somebody's health, you would think the natural place to look would be the healthcare system, the electronic health record, talk to a physician. What we've learned, and machine learning has shown very powerfully, is that actually many of the inferences about health can be drawn from non-health care information.
Especially when it's about the brain.
Exactly.
Because it's interacting in the world.
Exactly.
It is us.
And so if you have a data, and when we talk about what the law is ready, right, notice that we have a data privacy law in this country, a federal one, HIPAA, not intended to be a privacy law, but it is a privacy law essentially, extremely focused on covered entities, particular kinds of information and the like, not well suited for protecting privacy of all this ambient information that can generate.
Yeah, I mean, HIPAA is, I can never get what the two Ps are, but it's the health insurance.
Yeah, it's Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act.
Yeah,
there's no privacy.
Right. So what we need is a LIPA, which
Right.
is the life insurance. Because I think the question that you sort of read my mind, so I think we're sort of an interconnected entity here, is there's this system that's being created, and you demanded a character. So what is this system? Who owns this system? Who are owners of this system? And here in Washington, I think we should think heavily about that.
Yeah. So just to pull on this thread
Kaiser?
a little bit. Well, it would be, in some ways, Kaiser would be a positive story as opposed to Meta, as opposed to kind of, insurance companies, as opposed to the government, right? So those are the ones that I'm even more afraid of than Kaiser.
Really?
Yeah.
So let's break this down.
Sure.
I mean, many of us would put our trust in government. The audience was in peals of laughter at that point. Sorry about that. I should have done that. But anyway. But yeah, let's break this down. Back to my example, my appliances, and those are made by a variety of different companies. My smartphone, my car, etc. And then I've got this thing that's gathering data and integrating them. Maybe that's the thing we should talk about. What is this integrator that we're visioning that will sort of say, Jason's doing well versus, the way he's not opening the refrigerators frequently and he's constantly running red lights. A whole host of things suggest there's probably, who owns that system? Where is it coming from?
Yeah, so just to break this down a little bit, right? There's this question of data collection, there's this question of data aggregation, there's this question of data analysis, and there's this question about what you do with the data, right? Those are four kind of steps along the way. And it need not be the same person that's doing everything. So for example, we have widespread data brokerages that's job is to stitch together lots of data we're leaking in all sorts of ways to help people make credit determinations of you. So the first question is just to say, who gets to collect the data, on what terms, and how is that data collected in a way that either protects you or doesn't protect you? And I'll give an example from a project years ago I worked on with Fei Li at Stanford, right? So this was very interesting, fall detection. Huge problem for the communities you all deal with, right? You make a decision, you want to build an intelligence system. They started in hospital rooms, but the idea was this could be deployed in nursing homes, could be deployed in lots of different places to have fall detection and to have alert. And the question right up front was, how do you set this up and design this? Computer science, vision problem, computer vision problem. They made a design decision very early, and I always laugh at this because I like video games. They actually jury-rigged a bunch of Xboxes that had a Connect function, which is this little toy you use if you play virtual soccer and the like. So it detects your motion when you kick a ball, for example. And what's interesting is it just detects the motion. There's no capture of an image of the person. There's no capture of kind of defining features. And they purposefully did this as a privacy-enhancing part of the initial design. One can understand why well-meaning researchers might do that. On the other hand, if your business is collecting data and selling data, and you think that actually your consumers are either unaware, unresponsive, or you just don't care what they think about collecting more data, your incentive towards this data minimization, as we call it, that is collecting the least amount necessary for the task at hand, might be low. So not only are we talking about collecting data that's relevant for the task, that seems like a good task, but there's a strong incentive to go beyond that.
Yeah, so while we're here, let's get a little more kind of thing. And you're right, if I had a company that, data is gold, and you're telling me I can only mine for copper, I'd be like, well, now, wait a minute. I'd like to take a few more minerals out of the land. The metaphor is overdone. But we chatted a bit about this. Cardiovascular has been dealing with this. I mean, there's a host of devices now that are in bodies to monitor how the heart's working, the system's working, et cetera. And so there's a bit of is there some precedent here that we can look to in the cardiovascular space?
I mean, to some extent, yes, although I'll tell you, and I'm working on this topic right now with pacemakers, that you'd be surprised with pacemakers, so an implantable device, right? Actually, there's the data we use from it and it's designed for, but typically there's much more data that's collected that can be repurposed in ways that are interesting and helpful, but also can be repurposed in a way that might be terrifying. And I'll give you the example that there's some cardiologists that have talked in the Savannah Guthrie's mother case about using this to try to determine where she is, her pacemaker data. She has a pacemaker. And this question about, like, that sounds, oh, wow, that would be really great. And then I tell you that actually you go to an anti-ICE protest, and I can actually use the same kind of techniques to try to pick you out, and you're like, maybe not so great, right? So this idea that some of the things we build often collect or have the potential to collect more data, and this is often described by people in the privacy world as function creep. And the Social Security number is the best example of this. When the Social Security number was created, had a very specific function, and now it basically has become a de facto national identifier in a country where we don't have that. We're not like the UK or Canada. And many of these devices, I think, have the same feature. And you can promise initially not to collect the information. But if your relationship with the patient or the consumer is based on contracts of adhesion that kind of get updated and click through and can be updated, really, unless the limitation's built into the device to begin with, chances are over time we tend to evolve towards more data collection, not away from it.
So let's think about this, and I do think the bias is, not the bias, in a highly entrepreneurial, innovative culture such as ours, it's more data is better. Indeed, I think that's almost a maxim of virtue here in our world. So let's take that system of monitoring the mind, and I do think it's about monitoring the mind, as opposed to just the cognition, et cetera. And let's think about where it's put. So again, in this preclinical space, so we're talking about people like you and me out functioning in the world, but maybe because of a biomarker, we've learned that our brain is at risk of neurodegeneration, and maybe we learned that because we did a home test on our own time. So now we enter into this system that we still are wondering who owns this system or the owners of the system. And let's think about two scenarios. One is you live in the community, whatever that means, meaning place that you call your home. the system that strikes me as more interesting and challenging is once you move into a continuing care kind of community. Reflect on that. So I'm in that community, and they've promised me, well, continuing care. And in return for that, they obviously need to sort of make sure I'm doing okay. So there's a host of data now being gathered about me. Let's reflect on that world where now the place that I live, that I have a relationship with, contractual to a degree, I paid them money, is gathering all kinds of data about me. What comes to mind as you reflect on that?
Yeah, so first of all, one question is, the data is collected, what's done with the data, right? What is the quality of the data analysis? And one thing that people are often surprised when I tell them is the vast majority of medical artificial intelligence is not reviewed or not cleared, but even reviewed by the FDA, right? So essentially, we have a lot of discretion and scope for these companies to kind of do it. And then the question is also, what is the alignment between the developers of the device, the operators of your long-term care facility or your more continuous monitoring facility, and the patient and the patient's family? And this is, I think, a complicated ethical alignment in that I have children. I'm a child of parents in their 80s. If you told me I could actually be secure and know that I could have access to information about my parents' health states and where they were constantly, I would, I'm a good Jewish son, I would love that, right? I would love to have all this information. I think my parents might feel very differently about it. And which of us is paying the bill, by the way, and which of us is dealing with the management? And what is the management doing with the packaging of the data? And is there selling of the data, reducing the cost for the patient? What about the insurer? What about the physicians who work here? All these people have data that's being collected and repurposed, and their interests are not always completely convergent.
This is a question that, going back to our scholastics, cui bono, who's benefiting from this system? Let's focus, though, hopefully on the person for now, at risk of neurodegeneration. You mentioned your parents, and I wrote recently about a physician, entrepreneur, highly tech-savvy guy who wired up his mom's apartment so as to keep her in her apartment and safe. And he had access to all of her data, and it was this totally sui generis, bespoke thing that he set up, completely, as we converse about this world, I'm thinking of that son and his mom, because what it makes me think of is, I think many of us would start with the idea of how can this be something that a trusted network can use? In other words, there's natural, excuse the phrase, I'm not sure what the word that means, but there are the usual constructions of families that exist. Might we think about a world where there's a system set up to really encourage a kind of, not necessarily has to be your child, adult child, but people whose trusted job is, I will be your data curator, integrator, interpreter, et cetera. I'm your, almost in the role that you all have as attorneys, or that I have as a physician. Like, I am your fiduciary with your data. I'm going to help understand what this refrigerator data is telling me, or what this fall data is telling me, et cetera, your television, so that I can then help you to decide how we're going to use it and when. What do you think about that world?
I think it would be great. And then sometimes there's people describe information fiduciaries and think that actually we should think about companies and impose fiduciary duties a bit.
Yeah.
Part of what's interesting, though, is in the current world, in the world of 10 years ago, it's the physician, but you have a hard time accessing the physician, or you only get a slice of the clinician, right? What the AI allows us to do is to scale that kind of analysis and monitoring function, kind of not towards infinity, but scale it significantly. So that's a huge plus in terms of the analysis. At the same time, you as a physician, you are licensed, you can be kind of sued for malpractice, you are trained in ethics, you have a part of a profession that has an ethical code. None of that is true about the AI itself, and not all of it's true about the people who make the AI, right? So the question about what their duties are to the patient and the patient's family is typically not governed by a government-sanctioned monopoly like the licensure of physicians, or a thick conception of the ethics of what it is to be a caregiver. Instead, they react and they relate to a patient as a company. And, it's the scorpion and the frog, right? They're going to be the kinds of things they're going to be. And companies are not set up. They can be ethics, and they can have ethics at the core of them, and they ought to. But they're kind of, what they respond to and what they're aligned to is not the same thing a clinician is aligned to.
Yeah, it's funny. We haven't pivoted to dementia yet. In this case, I'm talking about his mother certainly had dementia caused by Alzheimer's and cerebral amyloid angiopathy. But she really, their story really made me reflect because, this was truly a bespoke setup, and it was totally internally controlled by him and her, of course, trusting him. And as I learned about it, I thought about my own situation. And in my basement are these two Amazon Alexas that have one of them still in its box. And I bought them with this ambitious idea that my father and I would have this Amazon Alexa communication because he was living 2 hours away. And let's just say that I couldn't get the darn things to work. And no, this is me. It's not Amazon, and it's not the Alexa. Meanwhile, this guy's got a Raspberry set up, and he's literally like telling me how he was able to find out that the U.S. Open's on and call up his mom and say, Mom, the TV's on to the U.S. Open, because she couldn't work the TV anymore. So in other words, his ability to sort of run her world and monitor her world was spectacular. But it was only because he had this just preternatural skills and tech and whatnot. And I'm thinking there's almost a role for an as yet undefined profession whose job is to, and, you use the word caregiver, and that immediately has us think of CNAs and whatnot. But it's this new profession that will help you set up your digital world, interpret your digital world, curate it, and interact. What do you think about the possibility of some new profession? Because we're pretty busy in medicine right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the profession exists. It's called the Stasi, and this is just to say that I think of the lives of others, and I think about the ways in which surveillance is like this, beneficent surveillance sounds very good, but actually, is this a disfiguring of the correct relationship between a child and a parent, even a parent who is in decline, right? And what does his mother understand about this setup? What is the way she's consented to this setup? And what about when her feelings change over time? How is that registered? And how does all of that happen in the psychodrama of a familial setting? You might say that this is a very kind of complicated and fraught territory.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking maybe it's not about the family, but about this sort of third party. Let's focus on one of the devices, which is the automobile. I remember reading an article that folks were getting in the New York Times, well researched, that folks were suddenly finding their auto insurance rates were increasing notably. And one of the stories that the reporter recounted was an individual who had purchased, I don't know, was a car, and he'd like to go race it around an auto track, like very legitimate. It was a legitimate auto racing track. Go as fast as you want. And of course, in his car was a device that was detecting that, and his rates just exploded because he obviously was driving in a very reckless way. And it was a great example of the auto as this thing that monitors. I mean, it's a highly cognitively and mind-demanding tool to use. And of course, we have a rich, robust auto insurance world that would love to know how you're using it and whatnot. Reflections on that?
Yeah, so great. So a couple of things here, right? We've talked a little bit about the data collection side. Now let's shift to the other end of it, is to say how data collected can be used for you or against you.
Yeah.
And here I think part of what's interesting is questions about actuarial fairness is what we talk about. It was to say, what is the correct way to set the rating or the cost for auto insurance as someone has cognitive decline, for example, or take it away from them. And what you'll find is in the United States, at least, we have relatively thin anti-discrimination protections related to aging and related to cognitive decline. That until you're at the point where substantial life activity is like very much disrupted, the Americans with Disabilities Act won't give you a lot of protection in terms of employment. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act for genetic tests covers health insurance, but doesn't cover long-term care insurance, for example. So we have all of these gaps. So it's not just like we want to learn about you and we're going to be beneficent about it, but we're going to learn about you. And some of what we learn about you, including from your car, may actually negatively affect you. And then we have to ask the question about whether the negative effect is the actuarially or ethically correct rate setting, even if it means you're paying a lot more.
Yeah, let's actually focus. You gestured a bit to this. So the age of risk for neurodegenerative diseases starts to trickle in around the 50s, kicks in the 60s, such that by in the 70s, neurons are dying, dysfunctional symptoms are appearing, and by 75, the risk of dementia takes off. So the vision of prevention is a vision that starts probably sometime in that fifth, sixth decade. And you can stratify the risk a bit. If you're an ApoE homozygote, you're probably in that more the 50s. If you're non-carrier, maybe later. But there'll be other, my hand waving and whatnot is not intended to be dismissive, but I never never cease to be amazed at our ability to use a variety of proteomics and genomics to stratify people into bins of risk. Having said that, of course, that's the age when, for many people, they've paid off their house. If they've had children, they've done that American bizarre thing of paying enormous amounts of money for education in colleges and whatnot. And so finally now is the chance to really build up the retirement money that's needed. That's also really needed if you develop dementia, because you're going to need to pay for your care, because in America you're on your own until you meet Medicaid levels. Okay, so in that world you're working and you're now in our monitored world. Okay, I've got my job and I'm being monitored and they're beginning to detect problems. You mentioned the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is really designed, I think, for physical disability. I don't think we've really, as a country, thought through how are we going to manage emergent cognitive disabilities in the workspace, other than just say, well, you've got MCI, it's time to retire.
Yeah, we live in a country where actually employment protections in general are fairly weak compared to our peer countries. But completely right. Unless you have a substantial impairment in a major life activity, which means pretty significant disruption, you're not going to even be covered. You're not going to be defined as disabled within the Americans with Disabilities Act meaning, or unless you're perceived to have that disability. And so, as you say, because it is this slide, right? If they can, expect that you're going to get there someday, but you're not there yet, you're not yet covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and your employment is not protected by it.
Yeah, so what vision to a future here of how we're going to manage with folks who are in the workplace, still have a rich semantic memory and skills and whatnot, and yet data are emerging that, there's on microstructural analysis of their MRI, et cetera, mischief going on in some key regions, et cetera. Perhaps they're on an anti-amyloid or anti-tau or anti-synuclein drug in an effort to slow it down. How are we going to set up a world that protects these individuals from suddenly finding that they've been moved to a cubicle in the back room and, we're downsizing your entire department? What's a vision for that future?
Okay, so 3 different ways of cutting this real quick. Well, one is just say politically, is there motivation to kind of do this? We do have an Age Discrimination Employment Act, but it's about literally the line of age. They have not revisited GINA, the Genetic Information on Discrimination Act, over many years. So what does the political constituency to get this done look like? Second question, how do you do it legally? Actually, not that hard. You can specify, we have models about what a model law could look like. That wouldn't be that hard. Hardest question, I think, is the normative question, which is to say, at what point is it fair for an employer to actually take into account your slow cognitive decline? And the model for American anti-discrimination law is anti-stereotyping for the most part, which is to say, we don't want you're here, we don't want them to assume you're way down here, and so because we're worried they're going to jump from one to the other, that's why we want a Protection Act. As opposed to saying a model that says, even taking into account where you are and penalizing you or changing your job in a result, I don't know that there's a normative consensus that people think that is a problem, and that's the kind of thing anti-discrimination law in this country should deal with.
Okay, we've dealt with the residential care community. We've talked about family or the sort of trusted others. Who would they be, and how? We talked about the car, because that's a bit of a high-octane device in America for some odd reason for just self-determination. The workplace. Any other settings or concerns in this sort of preventive vision that will be someday? I think it's not a question of whether, but when we enter into this preventive vision world. Any other concerns that emerge?
We haven't talked so much where you began, which is the agentic side, right? So now we're talking about deploying these tools in your life to manage your life in a way that might actually be goal-directed, but not directed by particular tasks, right? So part of what I'm interested in is just to say, and I don't know that we have great computer-human interaction data on this, but how do people who are experiencing the start of cognitive decline as they go down, how do they understand what an agent is, and how are the agents disciplined in a way to actually serve and be aligned with the people we want? So you talked about fiduciaries before. These agents don't have a thick fiduciary duty. They don't have duties, how to think about them and how they're aligned, I'm very interested in too.
Yeah, let's reflect on that. What are some thoughts that come to mind?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a huge potential benefit here for agentic AI to actually increase the autonomy for people who are experiencing this, and also people who may actually also have mobility deficits associated with aging and the like. So I'm very excited, and I think this is actually a good match of problem to solution space. On the flip side, I'm very interested in some of the what's gone wrong thus far with agentic AI, with like Claude, whatever it's called, but Claude, I can't remember the name right now.
Claude.
No, not Claude. Claude book. What is it called? Wait. OpenClaw. Thank you. OpenClaw.
Oh, what
which
a
is,
great name.
yeah. Well, yeah.
Wow.
Doesn't scare you at all,
What
right?
Madison Avenue genius came up with that one?
And if you give OpenClaw your credit card, right, the kind of mischief they can get up to in 3% of the cases while doing great things in 97% of the cases, right? So we think the future world is extremely powerful agents being deployed kind of en masse. They do require a certain amount of supervision. And who is going to be the supervising? Whether one could imagine a world where actually there is a profession whose job is to help patients who are aging manage their own AI agents in a way. So kind of like,
Yeah, no, it's as the mind begins to transform from a disease like Lewy body disease or Alzheimer's or TDP encephalopathy, 43 disease, the axis of experience does change. People lose some capacities for emotional processing. Some sensory capacities are lost. Taste and smell is a common one. But really where things start to get chipped away early on is agentive abilities. And so I think what you and I are both concurring on in my own way is the ability of agentive technologies to step in and push people back up on that axis of agency is really quite promising. But then the question is these are not agents that we've relied on since humankind, which is humans, other humans, right? I mean, that's what a caregiver is. A caregiver is an agentive support for another person. We don't think of them that way, but we should. But once machines, generalized pre-trained transformers, step in and say, I'm going to help you be agentive, it raises the question of, I guess, what's the pre-training, if you will? Yeah, what language model should be plugged in to help Glenn be Glenn, or to help Jason be Jason?
And the idea that preferences might change over time, but agents are often set and forget in a certain way that may not be a great, so again, what I think is interesting is as compared to human agents, the AI agents kind of, the duty of loyalty piece is pretty good, right? They are kind of, it's not that they have their own desires that might come in contravention with us most of the time if they're trained properly. The problem, though, is the sophistication of the theory of other mind and the sophistication of trying to anticipate what it is we want as our agents, right? A good human agent is good on that front, but may be bad on the fiduciary duty of loyalty. And in some ways, the current model of agentic AI that we're seeing so far, early days, I think has the flip in some ways that are interesting.
What's the flip?
The flip is pretty good loyalty and alignment on loyalty,
Yeah.
but actually pretty bad or rudimentary understanding of the tasks and how we would want the task done.
Yeah, the fundamental challenge of caregiving is to ask that question of mind perception, which is what is it like to be my husband, my wife, my mom? And then you figure that out, and that's why you do the things you do or don't do the things you do. And I don't know if an agent is capable of asking that question as it interacts with me. What is it like to be Jason? I mean, it pretends like it is, even using the first person pronoun, which is incredibly awkward, when it talks to you as though it itself has a subjective experience, I think, and, I would be happy to help you, etc. Like, there's no subjectivity here. Stop using the first person pronoun. I digress. But I think the challenge here is how to get is it possible to think of agentive AI as capable of mind perception?
And just to be slightly metaphysical about this, right?
Slightly.
Just slightly. Does it matter, right? Because you say, does X have a theory of mind? Glenn understands that Jason thinks and what Jason wants and the like. Versus, can Glenn behave in a way that mimics what somebody who had a theory of mind would do? And if that's better, why do we need this intermediate concept of the theory of mind?
Well, in the end, it's like I can tell time from a digital clock of me or from a good old-fashioned analog, but they're telling me the same thing, which is time. Granted, this one winds down, that one can break, and right now it's breaking. You just round up to 10. I think one of the interesting statements I'm getting more and more in my practice, I'm diagnosing people earlier and earlier. Like when I first saw folks at the Memory Center, the average mini-mental of a new patient was 20. Solid, mild to early moderate stage dementia by that crude metric. Now the average mini-mental is somewhere in the high 20s. And I think it reflects a host of transformations, which I won't detail. But now I've noticed more and more when I've diagnosed individuals with cognitive impairment and using and have diagnosed it as caused by Alzheimer's, a not uncommon and fairly reflective statement is people talking about when and how they will end their life. They're interested in treatment, but they're also interested in knowing that there's a time when I'm going to not want to live with this disease if it progresses. And I've often thought, how would an agentive AI engage someone in a discussion of those kind of topics? Or would it be trained to just kind of do what, when it's, oh, I can't discuss that, or, the usual way some of them have been trained to avoid political topics and whatnot. And it will be very interesting to see the degree to which we design agentive AIs to really allow people with minds threatened by diseases like Alzheimer's to have conversations about the existential experiences of having these diseases. And it's both exciting but also dreadful. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
I think George is giving a signal that he wants to switch to question and answers,
We
right?
have only a few minutes left.
Okay. Well, while the audience queues up their questions and approaches mics, did you have any thought on that one?
I think they could be very good at this in the sense of like good to interact with and kind of reinforcing of people's views and easy to talk to. We've seen this in the adolescent space that actually.
Well, that could be a disaster then.
Well, I know, but just to say, so can talking to me about it. I'll just put it that way.
I've often thought if it fed Amy Bloom's In Love as its key language model, it would pretty much say, when are we going to get to Switzerland? If it fed Lisa Marshall's In Love, A Diary of Alzheimer's, Hello Alzheimer's, which is a story of caring for her husband until his death from Alzheimer's, it would have a very different conversation perhaps. A lot of it depends on what of our language that we use to talk about these diseases it learns from. George, do we have any questions?
Yes, so please, if you have questions, please feel free to come to the mic on the aisles, or if you have trouble getting there, just raise your hand and there's people with a mic that can actually get to you. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for the great discussion. This was really fantastic. My name is Desh Mohan. I'm one of the founders of Coda Health. We support advanced care planning for patients, making decisions about serious illness. And so one of the things that we think about is the process of identifying a medical power of attorney or a healthcare proxy, and what are the decisions that you would want that proxy to make or not make. And your discussion made me think about, are these kinds of decisions some of the things that may need to come into that discussion of, would you want this kind of AI-based monitoring and support, and at what point? I'm curious if those are things that you think will start becoming more and more important.
I do.
I do as well. So there's also some interesting work on patient prediction, and so Brian Earp has this paper, a series of papers on patient predictive algorithms and whether actually you can do better as somebody with power of attorney, for example, if an AI has been trained on the corpus of data of the person you're trying to predict for what they would have wanted, the ways in which dealing with an agent that's been trained on their data might actually inform your own understanding of their preferences. And I find this work very interesting. I'm not sure I believe it, but I find it quite an interesting kind of research project.
Right.
Hi, I'm Misha Pavel, Northeastern University. Exciting conversation and very topical, very current. But one thing I didn't hear that underlies medical decision-making in general is the notion of utility. Now, I give my huge amount of privacy up to be able to drive a car. But the benefit of driving a car overshadows the cost, the potential cost. So I was wondering if there is any kind of views that you could add to consider both the utility of the individual who is potentially compromised and also of the caregiver.
I'm going to talk a minute about Thomas More, Sir Thomas More in A Man for All Seasons. There's a famous line where he says, "It profiteth a man nothing to win the world and lose his soul. But for whales," right, because he makes this deal to be in charge of whales. And part of what I think of often is that we give up a lot of our privacy, not for whales, but for Instagram, for Facebook, for all of these things. And the baseline has kind of changed for us. And I think, what you said, the who benefits question is really very central here. that my sense is that these products move into an ecosystem, and the ecosystem kind of evolves around us, such that the baseline of what we'd expect. Now, on the positive side, the idea would be I could live a much more autonomous life. I could live in a facility and a space that allowed me more autonomy for a much longer period of my life in exchange for having this more robust monitoring. That, I think, is a laudable goal. But my sense is that much of the Internet of Things data collection happens slowly and in this web in a way where that trade-off is not so clear. I don't know what you think about this.
I think that for humans are, I think crows and a few other species are also like us. We're really good at using the world around us to augment and amplify our cognitive and emotional abilities. Both of us had our devices here to help out, et cetera, for example, other people, et cetera. So in some sense, the conversation we're having is nothing new. That is to say, we've always used notepads, devices, et cetera. The problems, I think, are those things often, if there were other humans, there was a consensual relationship, et cetera. Devices are passive, inert things. All of a sudden, the machines are like the people, and it's getting a little more complicated. And I don't think we've thought through culturally about that new way of being a human, of having a human mind.
Hi, I'm Mushtaba Khaliji from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I'm going to get very metaphysical. So three notions were mentioned: theory of mind, sense of self, and desires along that line. So what sets AI apart from humans? Where do we draw the line? Because I'm a set of internal states, and if I define myself by my physical being and my desires emanating from them, then what's the distinction between an AI? I'm thinking of Hal from the Space Odyssey, who doesn't want to be turned off. Is that a sense of survival? So where do we draw that line, and what would that look like?
And the line you're concerned about or you'd like to draw?
Where does being human end and being a machine start?
Yeah, another way to say this, I have no idea what a robot is, but I think that, as I reflect on the topic based on what I've read and written about, AI does not have a body. It does not have a beating heart and eyes, and it doesn't feel pain and pleasure and hunger. It lacks a whole host of things that I think make the human mind. Does AI have a mind? I don't think carbon's essential. So I guess a silicated creature can have a mind, but I don't think it's a human mind. I think a human mind. Let me put it another way. I think if you took my brain and put it into a 6'7", 190-pound guy, I don't think the words and ideas that would come out of that would be the same that you're hearing now in this 145-pound, 5'11" frame. And it's not just the weight and size. There's something about brains and bodies interacting in the world we're in. And persons with dementia, I'll wrap up, show this in spades, because as they start to lose and have transformations in autonomic function, mental processes change. If you change their environments, you can see dramatic changes in experiential and agentive abilities. And so, the brain is not the mind, is my point. And AI, in some sense, is a bag of fat made of silicon. It doesn't have a body.
Can I get one more comment in before the buzzer? To me, the answer to your question depends entirely on the question why we're asking it. So if you want to know who should be liable and suable in a lawsuit,
There you go.
which is a fit romantic partner, right? Which one could be a good agent for me in predicting what I want as a substitute decision maker? The answers might be entirely
So you can't sue AI. Sadly, people have romantic relations with it. And
necessarily sadly, you don't know what their sex
well,
life
I
is
don't
like.
know, man. I mean, it's just, to me, it's a little weird. Okay,
We don't judge.
All right. I think we have only 30 seconds left if you have a very quick question. Otherwise, maybe we can do it after the podium.
Take it away, Peter.
Let's hear the question. We won't get an answer. Why don't we do the question, Elise?
Okay.
So I'll invite Jason up to meet our robot during the demonstration session if he wants to know what one version of a robot is. And as a neurologist, I frequently say our brain is overrated. It is embodied cognition, so I'm with you there, or embodied mind. I'm Peter Whitehouse. I'm a neurologist from Case Western Reserve University, and as I just identified, we have a year 4 project with my colleagues to develop Navi, which is a robot that has eyes and can listen and can talk to folks. I also work in the pediatric space, and I'm worried about the challenges we're learning about relationships that was alluded to just a minute ago with kids and youth becoming dependent on and perhaps developing cognitive atrophy, not exactly, but cognitive impairment. So what do you think are the dangers of, the opportunity costs of this biomedical, you are your body and you are going to be taken care of by technology kind of model of health that potentially results in older people being more detached from humans and probably as importantly detached from nature unless this technology really supports the humanization process and doesn't dehumanize.
The case I described I wrote about it in Stat of the son who was a physician, and just a preternatural skill is very interesting. The turning point in the essay that I thought was particularly, he said, I was too enthusiastic, meaning I had the whole house wired up, and she was able to stay there. And finally she wasn't, and he moved her to a residential setting, and she blossomed because she was around other humans. And all of a sudden, the human interaction had her cognitively improved, which, we all think, oh, they can, it's an inevitable decline, And he said, I waited too long. I should have placed her much earlier into that setting with these other humans, interacting with her, et cetera. I was just too zealous with all my technology. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for both our speakers, and that wraps up this session.